Under the shadow of an old building, a girl held her drawings as if holding her own future. But a millionaire, without knowing why, stopped, bent down and picked up one of those papers stained with ink and hope. The simplicity of that drawing awakened a dormant pain within him, and with it, a possibility he had never considered, to start over. If you love great stories, please subscribe to our channel and comment where you're from. Let's continue. Chapter 1. The Girl with the Drawings. Winter in Boston was unforgiving, especially on Beacon Hill, where historic brick buildings offered little shelter from the biting northeastern wind. Yet there she sat day after day, a small figure huddled against the cold stone steps of the old public library. Lily Parker was just 9 years old, though her eyes carried the weight of someone who had seen far more of life's harshness than any child should. Her small hands, red and chapped from the cold, clutched several sheets of paper stained with watercolors and marker ink. Despite the freezing temperature, she remained determined, holding up her artwork to passing strangers who barely spared her a glance. $1. That's all she asked for each drawing. $1 that could mean a warm meal, or perhaps a few hours in a heated diner where the waitresses sometimes let her sit if she ordered just a cup of hot chocolate. "Would you like to buy a drawing, Ma'am?" Lily's voice was soft but hopeful, as a woman in an expensive coat hurried past, cell phone pressed to her ear, discussing what sounded like important business matters. The woman didn't even look down. Lily sighed, adjusting her worn blue beanie that barely covered her auburn hair. She had been in the foster care system since she was 5, bounced from one home to another until she ended up at the Riverside Children's Home 6 months ago. But Lily couldn't stay there, not after what happened with the older kids, not with the indifferent staff who never seemed to notice when she cried herself to sleep. So she ran. Not far, just enough to carve out her own small corner of the world where she could at least control her own fate. The librarians inside knew her. They let her use the bathroom and sometimes slipped her a granola bar when no one was looking. But they had rules too, and couldn't let her stay inside all day without alerting authorities. Drawing had always been Lily's escape. Even in her worst foster homes, she could disappear into worlds of color and imagination. Now, it was her only source of income. Some days were better than others. Once, an elderly tourist had given her $20 for a simple sketch of the Boston skyline. That had been a feast day, a hot meal, a new pack of markers, and even a small chocolate bar she'd savored over 3 days. Today had not been so kind. 4 hours sitting in the cold had yielded only $2, not enough for both food and warmth. Lily's stomach growled, reminding her that she'd had nothing since yesterday's half-eaten sandwich from a kind deli worker. As the afternoon light began to fade, casting long shadows across the historic streets, Lily gathered her meager supplies. A small backpack containing her most precious possessions, a tattered stuffed rabbit named Mr. Hops, a photo album with just 3 photos of her parents before they disappeared from her life, an extra sweater and her art supplies. She had learned to travel light, to carry only what she could run with if necessary. She knew she should head to her hiding spot, a small alcove behind the community garden, where she'd stashed a sleeping bag and some cardboard for insulation. The temperature was dropping fast, and the weather report she'd seen on the library television warned of snow by midnight. Just as she was about to leave, a well-dressed couple paused near the library steps. The woman pointed toward some architectural feature on the building, and the man nodded, his expression thoughtful. They looked kind, Lily thought, the type of people who might have $1 to spare. Swallowing her pride, she approached them, timidly. "Excuse me," she said, her voice barely audible above the city noise. "Would you like to buy a drawing? They're only $1. The woman turned, startled by the small voice. Her eyes widened slightly as she took in Lily's appearance, the worn clothes, the smudges of dirt on her face that the library bathroom sink couldn't quite remove, the hopeful but guarded expression in her eyes. "Oh," the woman said, reaching for her purse. "I'd love to see your drawings, sweetheart." The man remained silent, his gaze fixed on Lily with an intensity that made her want to retreat. But there was something in his eyes, not pity which she hated, but a kind of recognition that made her stand her ground. Lily carefully selected what she considered her best work, a colourful scene depicting a family of 3 walking through what might have been Boston Common, holding hands beneath a bright yellow sun. The figures were simple, childlike in execution, but there was an undeniable emotion captured in the way they leaned toward each other, in the careful details of their smiling faces. The woman accepted the drawing with gentle hands. "This is lovely," she said sincerely. "You're very talented." But it was the man's reaction that caught Lily off guard. As he looked at the picture, something in his expression changed. His features seemed to soften and tighten simultaneously, as if fighting against some powerful emotion. For a moment, Lily thought he might be angry, and she took an instinctive step back. "How much did you say?" he asked, his voice strangely hoarse. $1, Lily replied, ready to lower her price if it meant making a sale this late in the day. The man reached for his wallet, movements deliberate, almost mechanical. Instead of a single dollar, he pulled out a 20. "I'd like to buy this one," he said, "and any others you might have." Lily blinked in surprise. "Really?" The woman was watching her husband with a curious expression, as if seeing something in him that Lily couldn't understand. "Really?" he confirmed, and for the first time he attempted a smile. It didn't quite reach his eyes, but the effort was there. "I'm Richard Wells. This is my wife, Diane." "I'm Lily," she replied cautiously, years in the system having taught her to be wary of adults showing too much interest. "It's getting cold, Lily," Diane said, glancing at the darkening sky. "Do you have somewhere warm to go?" The question hung in the air between them. Lily had prepared for this. She knew what to say to well-meaning adults who might report her to social services. "My aunt is picking me up soon," she lied, the words practiced and smooth. "She lets me sell my drawings after school." Richard's expression told her he didn't believe her, but he nodded anyway. "Well, since we're buying all your artwork, maybe. We could wait with you. It's not safe for a young girl to be alone as it gets dark." Fear and calculation flashed across Lily's face. These strangers seemed kind, but she'd been fooled before. Still, $20 would mean food for days. And something about the way the man looked at her drawing, like it had awakened something painful within him, made her hesitate before running. "I guess that would be okay," she said finally, hugging her backpack close as if it could shield her from whatever might come. What Lily couldn't know was that her simple drawing had cracked open a door in Richard Wells's heart that had been sealed shut for 5 years, ever since the accident that took his first wife and daughter on a rainy night on the Massachusetts Turnpike. She couldn't know that Diane Wells was a child psychologist who worked with traumatized children, or that they had been unable to have children of their own despite years of trying. She couldn't know that her decision to show them her drawing, this particular drawing of a family holding hands beneath a yellow sun, would be the first step on a journey that would change all of their lives forever. As the 3 of them stood there, awkward and uncertain in the gathering darkness, the first snowflakes began to fall on Beacon Hill. Tiny crystalline messengers of a changing season, they seemed to whisper of endings and beginnings, of chances and changes, of the strange ways that lives can intersect at exactly the right moment. "Maybe," Diane suggested gently, "we could get some hot chocolate while we wait. There's a cafe just around the corner." Lily hesitated, years of survival instincts warring with the gnawing hunger in her stomach and the promise of warmth. Finally, clutching her remaining drawings to her chest, she nodded. "Okay," she said softly, "but just until my aunt comes." Both adults recognized the lie for what it was, but neither called her on it. Instead, Richard carefully folded the drawing he had purchased and placed it in his inside coat pocket, right next to his heart, where the pain had lived for so long. Chapter 2. The Architect's Burden. Richard Wells stood by the floor-to-ceiling, windows of his Beacon Street office, gazing at the Charles River as it flowed beneath a blanket of morning fog. At 45, he was at the pinnacle of his career, founding partner of Wells & Associates, one of Boston's most prestigious architectural firms, with projects spanning from sleek downtown skyscrapers to the restoration of historic buildings throughout New England. From the outside, his life appeared perfect. The corner office with its impressive view, the renovated Victorian brownstone in Back Bay where he lived with Diane, the respect of his peers, and the financial security that allowed him to indulge in any material comfort he desired. Yet inside, Richard carried a hollowness that no success could fill, a void that expanded with each passing year, despite his efforts to seal it away. "Richard," his assistant Kate's voice broke through his thoughts. "The clients from Providence are here for the presentation." He nodded, straightening his tie. "I'll be right there." Work was his sanctuary, the one place where the past couldn't intrude, where blueprints and measurements and client demands required his complete focus. Today was particularly busy. 3 client meetings, a site visit to the new library extension, and a fundraiser for historic preservation that evening. "Remember, Diane mentioned she might not make it to the fundraiser tonight," Kate added gently. "Her emergency session with that new client might run late." Richard nodded again, grateful for Kate's tactful management of his schedule and her quiet understanding. She had been with him through everything, even before the accident, and knew when to speak and when to remain silent. The morning passed in a blur of meetings and decisions. Richard was meticulous, demanding, occasionally brilliant in the solutions he proposed for challenging spaces. His clients valued his precision and vision. His employees respected his expertise while quietly acknowledging his emotional distance. By late afternoon, he found himself alone again, reviewing plans for a community center in South Boston. But his mind kept drifting back to the encounter from the previous evening, the girl with the drawings. They had taken her to the cafe as planned. She had ordered hot chocolate with extra whipped cream and a grilled cheese sandwich, which she consumed with the careful deliberation of someone making food last. Throughout their time together, she maintained the fiction of an aunt who never arrived, answering their gentle questions with practiced vagueness. Eventually, they had offered to drive her home. Predictably, she had refused, insisting her aunt's apartment was just around the corner. When it became clear they couldn't persuade her, Diane had slipped an extra $20 into the girl's pocket and given her a business card with her office number. "If you ever need anything," Diane had said, "or just want to talk, you can call me anytime." The girl, Lily, had nodded without commitment but tucked the card away with care. Then she had disappeared into the snowy evening, a small shadow merging with the darkness, leaving Richard with nothing but her drawing and the haunting familiarity of her eyes. Now alone in his office, he removed the folded paper from his coat pocket where he'd transferred it that morning. He hadn't shown it to Diane yet. Somehow it felt too private, too raw. The drawing was simple. 3 stick figures holding hands under a bright sun, a mother, a father, a child, a family, something he had once had and lost in a single moment on a rain-slicked highway. Emily had been 7 when it happened, just a bit younger than Lily appeared to be. His first wife, Jennifer, had been driving her home from a dance recital. The police report described the accident in clinical terms: hydroplaning, median barrier, instantaneous. The words did nothing to capture what was taken from him that night. For 3 years afterward, Richard had barely functioned. He sold their family home in the suburbs, unable to face the empty bedroom with its butterfly wallpaper and collection of stuffed animals. He threw himself into work, designing buildings that won awards while his personal life crumbled around him. He avoided children, birthday parties, family gatherings, anything that might remind him of what he had lost. Then he met Diane at a fundraiser, much like the one he would attend tonight. She was warm, patient, and perceptive, a child psychologist who understood grief without demanding that he overcome it on any timeline but his own. Slowly, carefully, she had helped him rebuild some semblance of a life. They married 2 years ago, a quiet ceremony with just close friends and family. They had discussed children, of course. Diane was 42 now, and while she never pressured him, he knew she longed for a family. But every time the subject arose, Richard found himself paralyzed by fear. How could he risk loving that deeply again, knowing how completely it could be taken away. And now this drawing, this simple arrangement of lines and colors, had somehow pierced through all his carefully constructed defenses. There was something about Lily that reminded him painfully of Emily. Not just her age or appearance, but a certain quality of resilience beneath vulnerability that his daughter had possessed. The intercom buzzed, startling him. He quickly folded the drawing and returned it to his pocket. "Your wife is on line 1, Kate announced. Richard picked up the phone. "Diane?" "Richard." Her voice carried that particular tone he had come to recognize, professional calm layered over excitement. "I've been making some calls about our young artist from yesterday." His heart rate quickened. "And?" "She's in the system, or was. Lily Parker, age 9. She was placed at Riverside Children's Home 6 months ago, but they reported her missing 3 weeks back. Apparently she's run away twice before, but always returned within a day or two. This time is different." Richard's architectural mind immediately began calculating. 3 weeks in Boston's winter. A 9-year-old girl with no visible means of support, except selling drawings for $1 each. It was a miracle she had survived. "How did you find this out?" he asked, although he already knew. Diane had connections throughout Boston's child welfare system. "Amanda Collins. You remember her from the hospital fundraiser last year. She's a social worker assigned to Lily's case. She's been looking for her, but resources are stretched thin, and honestly, Richard..." Diane's voice dropped. "From what Amanda tells me, Riverside isn't the best placement. There have been some concerns." Richard's jaw tightened. What kind of concerns? Nothing proven, but enough red flags that Amanda was already working on finding Lily a different placement when she disappeared. Older children bullying younger ones, staff turning a blind eye, reports of neglect. The image of Lily sitting alone in the cold, selling drawings for food money, flashed vividly in Richard's mind. Something protective and fierce awakened within him, an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. "What happens if they find her?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled. Diane hesitated. "She goes back to Riverside until another placement can be arranged. Foster care is overwhelmed. Right now, especially for children Lily's age. Most families want infants or toddlers." The silence between them stretched, filled with unspoken thoughts. "Richard," Diane finally said, her voice gentle but serious, "I know that look you had yesterday when you saw her drawing. I haven't seen you look that way in a very long time." He closed his eyes, remembering the sensation, like being struck by lightning, painful and illuminating all at once. "We should talk about this," she continued. "Really talk, but not over the phone. Can you come home early today?" Richard glanced at his schedule, at the fundraiser he was supposed to attend, at the models and blueprints spread across his desk representing millions of dollars in ongoing and future projects. "Yes," he said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "I'm leaving now." As he gathered his things, his hand brushed against the folded drawing in his pocket. Something was shifting inside him, painful, terrifying, but somehow necessary, like the controlled demolition of a structure to make way for something new. Outside, Boston was being transformed by snow, the harsh edges of the city softened by white. Richard stepped into it, feeling for the first time in years that he was moving towards something, rather than simply running from the past. Chapter 3. Finding Lily. The snow continued through the night, blanketing Boston in 8 inches of pristine, white by morning. As dawn broke over the city, Richard stood at the kitchen window of his brownstone, coffee cooling in his hand, watching the transformed landscape. The conversation with Diane had lasted late into the evening, honest, painful, hopeful, leading them to a decision that both terrified and energized him. They would look for Lily, not to report her to authorities, not yet anyway, but to understand her situation better, to see if there was some way they could help. Diane, with her professional background and connections, had already reached out to Amanda Collins for more information about Lily's case, careful not to reveal their encounter with the girl. "We need to find her first," Diane had said. "If she's been surviving on her own for 3 weeks, she must have established some kind of routine, places she feels safe." Now, as Richard prepared to leave for work, Diane entered the kitchen dressed not in her usual clinical attire, but in jeans, boots, and a heavy sweater. "I've rescheduled my appointments," she explained, pouring herself coffee. "Amanda's sending over Lily's file, confidentially, of course. She trusts my professional discretion. Meanwhile, I thought I'd start by checking the places we know Lily has been." Richard nodded, a complicated mix of emotions churning within him. Part of him wanted to join Diane immediately, to abandon his responsibilities and search every street until they found the girl. But another part, the part that had learned to function through grief by adhering to structure and obligation, held him back. "I have the site visit at the library this morning," he said, regret coloring his voice. "But I can cancel the afternoon. Meetings." Diane touched his arm gently. "Take the morning. I'll start looking and call you if I find anything. This might take time, Richard. She's survived this long by being careful. She won't make herself easy to find." He knew she was right, but the urgency he felt surprised him with its intensity. After years of emotional numbness, the sudden resurgence of feeling was almost overwhelming. "Here," he said, retrieving Lily's drawing from his briefcase. "Maybe this will help somehow." Diane studied the simple illustration, her trained eye noting details Richard had missed, the way the child figure in the middle was slightly elevated, as if being lifted by the adult figures, the careful attention to facial expressions, the protective stance of the adult figures. "This tells us a lot," she said softly. "This isn't just any family. This is her ideal, her wish. See how the adults are creating a safe space for the child. This is what she's looking for, what she needs." Richard felt a tightness in his throat. "Call me the moment you find anything." After Richard left for his site visit, Diane began methodically planning her search. The public library near Beacon Hill would be her first stop, the place they'd first encountered Lily. From the little information they'd gathered, it seemed the girl spent time there regularly. The library was bustling with activity despite the snow. Students studying, elderly patrons reading newspapers, parents with young children attending a morning story hour. Diane approached the reference desk, where a middle-aged librarian with a name tag reading Margaret was organizing a cart of books. "Excuse me," Diane began, pulling out her professional credentials. "I'm Dr. Diane Wells, a child psychologist. I'm trying to locate a young girl who may spend time here. Her name is Lily Parker, about 9 years old, auburn hair. She sometimes sells drawings outside." Margaret's expression shifted subtly. "Are you with social services?" "No," Diane clarified, sensing the woman's caution. "I'm working independently. Lily may be in an unsafe situation and I'm trying to help her." The librarian studied Diane carefully before responding. "We see a lot of children here. It's a public space." "Of course," Diane nodded, understanding the protective stance. "I'm not looking to get her in trouble. Quite the opposite." After a moment's hesitation, Margaret lowered her voice. "There is a girl who matches that description. She comes in most mornings when we open, uses the bathroom to clean up, sometimes reads in the children's section. We don't bother her as long as she's quiet and doesn't disturb others." "Do you know where she goes when she's not here?" Margaret shook her head. "She's careful about that, but—" She glanced around before continuing. "Sarah in the children's department might know more. She's given the girl snacks a few times." The children's department was colorful and warm, with low bookshelves and reading nooks designed for young readers. Sarah, a younger librarian with bright blue hair and a friendly smile, was shelving picture books when Diane approached. After a similar introduction and reassurance of her intentions, Sarah became more forthcoming. "Lily's smart, really smart," she said, leading Diane to a quiet corner. "She reads above her grade level, loves art books especially. I've tried to help when I can, but she's so independent, so wary of adults." "Do you have any idea where she might be staying?" Diane asked. Sarah hesitated. "She mentioned the community garden once. Said she liked watching the winter birds there. It's on Charter Street, not far from here. I don't know if that helps." It was a start. Diane thanked Sarah and headed toward Charter Street, the snow crunching beneath her boots. The community garden was locked for winter, a small fenced area with dormant raised beds and bare fruit trees. Nothing at first glance suggested it could provide shelter. As Diane circled the perimeter, she noticed a narrow gap between the garden shed and the brick wall of the adjacent building, just enough space for a small person to slip through. Heart quickening, she approached and peered into the shadowy recess. There, partially hidden by a tarp, was a nest of sorts, a sleeping bag laid over cardboard, a small backpack, and a plastic container that might have once held cookies. It was empty now, but the signs were clear. Someone small had been living here. Diane stepped back, her professional training warring with her emotional response. This discovery confirmed their fears. Lily was indeed homeless, surviving in dangerous conditions. But it also meant they had a chance to find her. She called Richard immediately. "I found where she's been sleeping," she explained, her voice tight with concern. "Richard, it's just a makeshift shelter behind a garden shed. With these temperatures." "I'm on my way," he said, all thoughts of work forgotten. While waiting for Richard, Diane carefully examined the small space without disturbing anything. The sleeping bag was damp from snow that had seeped in. The backpack contained a few items of clothing and an almost empty pack of crackers. Most telling were the drawings tucked into a plastic sleeve to protect them from moisture, similar to the one they had purchased, variations on the same theme of family, of belonging. When Richard arrived 30 minutes later, his face was taut with concern. "She's not here," Diane said, "but she'll likely return. Her things are still here." "We should wait," Richard decided, looking around at the neighboring cafes and shops. "We can watch from that coffee shop across the street. She'll be cautious, especially if she thinks someone has found her hiding place." They settled in the cafe with a clear view of the garden, ordered drinks, and prepared themselves. For a potentially long wait, Richard called his office to cancel his remaining appointments, citing a family emergency, words that felt strangely right despite their technical inaccuracy. Hours passed. The winter sun began its early descent, casting long shadows across the snow-covered streets. Diane and Richard took turns watching, stepping outside occasionally to check if the girl had somehow slipped past their notice. As dusk approached, Richard's phone rang, Amanda Collins returning Diane's earlier call. "I've sent over the file," she said, her voice professional but tinged with genuine concern. "There's something else you should know. Lily's situation at Riverside was worse than I initially mentioned. There have been allegations of physical abuse from some of the older children, so nothing sexual," she added quickly, "but bullying that went beyond typical conflicts. Staff shortages meant supervision was minimal." Richard's grip on the phone tightened. "And they haven't found her yet?" "Resources are limited," Amanda replied, the frustration evident in her voice. "The truth is, with older children who repeatedly run away, the system sometimes prioritizes other cases." "She's 9 years old," Richard said, anger rising in his voice. "I know," Amanda answered softly. "That's why I'm grateful you and Diane are looking for her. Just be careful how you proceed. Legally, you need to report if you find her." As Richard was about to respond, Diane touched his arm, her gaze fixed on something outside. Across the street, a small figure in a blue beanie was cautiously approaching the garden, stopping frequently to look around before continuing. "She's here," Richard whispered into the phone. "We have to go." "Richard," Amanda cautioned, "remember what I said about reporting." "I'll call you back," he said, ending the call as he and Diane quickly gathered their things. They crossed the street carefully, not wanting to startle Lily, but knowing they needed to reach her before she disappeared again. The girl spotted them when they were halfway across. Her eyes widened in recognition and fear, her body tensing to flee. "Lily, wait!" Diane called out, her voice gentle but urgent. "We just want to talk. You're not in trouble." The girl hesitated, one foot already turned to run, her expression calculating as she assessed her options. Richard stopped, allowing Diane to approach alone, understanding that a man might appear more threatening. "Your things are still there," Diane said, gesturing toward the garden shed. "We didn't take anything, I promise, but it's too cold to stay there tonight, Lily. the temperatures dropping below freezing. "I'm fine," Lily insisted, her voice stronger than her small frame suggested. "I've managed this long." "Yes, you have," Diane acknowledged, taking another careful step forward. "And that shows how brave and resourceful you are. But everyone needs help sometimes." "Are you going to call them?" Lily asked, her eyes darting to Richard. "The people who'll take me back to Riverside?" The question hung in the cold air between them. Richard looked at Diane, a silent communication passing between them. The decision they had discussed late into the previous night, the possibility they had both been afraid to fully articulate. "No," Richard said finally, finding his voice. "Not if you don't want us to. At least not right away." Relief and suspicion warred on Lily's face. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." Richard thought of the drawing in his pocket, of Emily's butterfly wallpaper, of the void that had lived inside him for 5 years. "Sometimes," he said carefully, "people come into our lives exactly when we need them, even if we didn't know. We were waiting." Lily's gaze shifted between them, wary but considering. The wind picked up, carrying snowflakes that caught in her hair and eyelashes. She shivered visibly despite her efforts to appear unaffected. "Just for tonight," Diane offered. "A warm meal, a safe place to sleep. In the morning you can decide what happens next." Another moment of calculation passed across Lily's face before the cold and hunger won out over caution. "Okay," she said finally. "Just for tonight." As they walked to Richard's car, Lily maintained a careful distance, her backpack clutched tightly to her chest. But she was coming with them, one small step toward trust that felt to Richard like the first breach in a dam that had held back his emotions for far too long. Chapter 4. Temporary Shelter. The Wells brownstone on Marlborough Street stood as a testament to Richard's architectural sensibilities. The original, Victorian details preserved and enhanced, modern conveniences seamlessly integrated, the space both elegant and welcoming. As they stepped into the warm foyer, Lily's eyes widened, taking in the high ceilings, the tasteful artwork, the unmistakable signs of wealth that surrounded her. "You can hang your coat here," Diane said gently, gesturing to the antique coat rack by the door. Lily hesitated, clutching her worn jacket closer. "I'll keep it, thanks," she replied, the wariness evident in her voice. Easy escape, Richard realized. She wanted to be ready to run at a moment's notice. "Of course," Diane nodded, understanding without judgment. "Are you hungry? We could make something for dinner." At the mention of food, Lily's resolve wavered slightly. "Maybe a little," she admitted, though the growl of her stomach suggested otherwise. They moved to the kitchen, a warm space with copper pots hanging above a center island, the smell of herbs growing in small pots on the windowsill, and large windows that would normally showcase the garden, but now reflected only darkness and their own images. "What would you like?" Richard asked, opening the refrigerator to survey its contents. "We have ingredients for pasta, sandwiches, or I could order something if you prefer." "Anything is fine," Lily answered, still standing near the doorway, her backpack clutched to her chest like a shield. Diane gently guided her to a stool at the island. "How about mac and cheese? I make it from scratch. It was my grandmother's recipe." Something in Lily softened slightly at this offering of normalcy, of family tradition. "Okay." As Diane began preparing the meal, Richard busied himself setting the table, giving Lily space while keeping her in his peripheral vision. She sat perfectly still, her posture alert, eyes constantly scanning the room as if memorizing escape. "Rotes." "You have a lot of books," she observed finally, noting the built-in bookshelves that lined one wall of the adjoining dining room. "We both love to read," Richard replied, glad for the opening. "Do you?" Lily nodded, some of her guardedness receding. "The librarians let me read whatever I want. I finished the whole Harry Potter series last year." "That's impressive," Diane said, grating cheese into a bowl. "What else do you enjoy reading?" "Art." "Books," Lily admitted, "and history sometimes. I like knowing about how people lived in the past." The conversation continued, tentative but warming, as the kitchen filled with the comforting aroma of cheese sauce, and bubbling pasta. By the time Diane served the meal, Lily had placed her backpack on the floor beside her, not abandoned but no longer clutched as a lifeline. Richard watched her eat, trying not to stare, but unable to suppress the surge of protective instinct that rose within him. She ate methodically, efficiently, like someone accustomed to not knowing when the next meal might come. Despite her obvious hunger, she maintained careful manners, a glimpse, perhaps, of her life before the system of someone who had taught her to say please and thank you, to use her napkin, to wait until everyone was served before beginning. After dinner, Lily helped clear the table without being asked, her movements suggesting a child accustomed to earning her keep. "Would you like to take a shower?" Diane offered. "I can lend you something clean to sleep in." Again hesitation, then a nod. "Yes, please." Diane led her upstairs to the guest bathroom, showing her how to work the shower, providing a fluffy towel and one of her own t-shirts that would serve as a nightgown on Lily's small frame. "I'll be right downstairs if you need anything," she assured the girl. When Diane returned to the kitchen, she found Richard standing at the window, looking out at nothing in particular, his expression distant yet intense. "What are we doing, Diane?" he asked quietly. She moved to stand beside him, her presence steady. The right thing, for tonight at least. "And tomorrow?" "We can't just send her back to that place, not after what Amanda told us." "No," Diane agreed. "But we need to be careful. Legally." "I know what the law says," Richard interrupted, then softened his tone. "Sorry, it's just seeing her, how she eats, how she watches everything. She's been through so much already." Diane leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "We need to earn her trust first, then we can figure out the next steps. There are proper channels." "Proper channels that failed her," Richard pointed out. Before Diane could respond, they heard Lily's footsteps on the stairs. She appeared in the doorway, swimming in Diane's t-shirt, her hair damp and darkened from the shower, her face scrubbed clean to reveal a splash of freckles across her nose. Without the layers of clothes and dirt, she looked even smaller, more vulnerable. "Feel better?" Diane asked with a warm smile. Lily nodded, a hint of relaxation in her posture now. "The shower had really hot water," she commented, as if this were a remarkable luxury. Perhaps Richard thought with a pang it was. "Would you like to watch something before bed?" he offered. "Or maybe read?" "Could I?" Lily hesitated, then continued in a rush. "Could I draw for a little while? I still have my supplies in my backpack." "Of course," Diane replied. "Let's set you up at the dining table where there's more room." Soon Lily was settled with her worn set of colored pencils and a few sheets of paper Diane had provided from their home office. The concentration on her face as she worked was absolute, her small hand moving with surprising confidence across the page. Richard and Diane moved to the living room to give her some space while remaining nearby, speaking in low voices about practical matters, where Lily would sleep, what they would do the next day, how they would approach the legal complexities of the situation. "I've texted Amanda," Diane said. "She's going to come by tomorrow morning to discuss options. As a social worker, she has more flexibility than most in the system." Richard nodded, his gaze continually drifting to Lily's focused form at the dining table. "What if?" he began, then stopped, the thought both terrifying and exhilarating. Diane watched him carefully. "Richard, are you thinking what I think you're thinking?" He met her eyes, seeing in them the same mix of hope and fear that churned within him. "I don't know, maybe. Is it crazy?" "Not crazy," she said softly, "but complicated. We'd need to consider everything, our schedules, our lifestyle, the legal hurdles, most importantly, what's best for Lily." "I know," he agreed. "It's just, when I look at her—" "I see it too," Diane assured him, squeezing his hand. "But let's take this one step at a time. Tonight she's safe. That's what matters right now." Their conversation was interrupted when Lily appeared in the doorway, a sheet of paper in her hand. "I made this for you," she said shyly, holding out her drawing, "to say thank you for dinner and everything." Richard accepted the offering, Diane moving beside him to see. Unlike the drawing they had purchased, with its generic stick figure, Family, this one was specifically them. A tall man with Richard's glasses and sweater, a woman with Diane's curly hair, both standing beside what was clearly their brownstone. The detail was impressive, the characteristic bow window of their home, the wrought iron fence, even the pattern of Diane's favorite scarf. "This is beautiful, Lily," Diane said, genuine admiration in her voice. "You've captured our home perfectly." "It's just you two, though," Richard observed, noting the absence of a child figure in the picture. Lily looked down, suddenly interested in a loose thread on her borrowed t-shirt. "I didn't know if, I'm only staying tonight, so." The unfinished thought hung in the air between them, weighted with unspoken wishes and fears. "Would you like to add yourself to the picture?" Diane asked gently. "Even if it's just for tonight?" Lily looked up, searching their faces for insincerity or deception. Finding none, she gave a small nod. "Maybe. If that's okay." "More than—" "Okay," Richard assured her, returning the drawing with careful hands. They watched as Lily carried it back to the dining table, selected a pencil, and with deliberate care added a small figure standing between the two adults, not touching them, not holding their hands, but undeniably present in the space between. Later, after Lily was settled in the guest room, the door left slightly ajar at her request, her backpack positioned strategically between the bed and the exit, Richard found himself standing in the doorway, watching the rise and fall of her breathing beneath the down comforter. Diane joined him, her voice barely above a whisper. "She's exhausted. Probably the first time she's felt safe enough to really sleep in weeks." Richard nodded, unable to articulate the complex emotions swirling within him. Instead, he reached for Diane's hand, their fingers intertwining in silent understanding. As they prepared for bed themselves, Richard found the drawing Lily had created, now displayed prominently on the refrigerator door. His eyes were drawn to the small figure she had added, standing near but not quite connected to the adult figures, a tentative presence in their pictured lives. "It's a beginning," Diane said, noticing his focus. Richard nodded, allowing himself to feel for the first time in years the dangerous, wonderful sensation of hope. Chapter 5. Truths and Decisions. Morning arrived with golden winter light streaming through the guest room windows. Lily woke disoriented, the softness of the mattress and the weight of the comforter unfamiliar after weeks of sleeping on cardboard and in her thin sleeping bag. For a moment, panic seized her. Where was she? What had happened? Then the events of the previous evening came flooding back, the couple finding her hiding place, the warm kitchen, the shower with endless hot water, the clean-smelling sheets. She sat up, listening intently. Soft voices drifted up from downstairs, along with the aroma of coffee and something baking. Her stomach growled in response, but caution kept her rooted to the bed. What would happen today? Would they call social services? Would she be sent back to Riverside? The very thought made her shudder. She glanced at her backpack, mentally calculating what she would need if she had to run again. The weather had gotten worse. She'd need more layers, maybe some food she could take. The thought brought shame. These people had been kind to her, and here she was planning to steal from them, but survival had taught her hard lessons about dependency and trust. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. Diane's voice came through the door. "Lily, are you awake? Breakfast is ready whenever you are." "I'll be right down," Lily replied, quickly changing from the borrowed t-shirt back into her own clothes. Downstairs, the kitchen was filled with morning light and the smell of cinnamon. Richard stood at the stove flipping what looked like French toast, while Diane set the table. It was such a normal domestic scene that Lily felt suddenly awkward, an intruder in this private ritual. "Good morning," Richard greeted her with a smile that seemed genuine if somewhat cautious. "Sleep well?" Lily nodded, hovering at the edge of the kitchen. "Come sit," Diane encouraged, pulling out a chair. "Richard makes the best French toast in Boston. It's a Saturday tradition." "It's Saturday?" Lily asked, realizing she'd lost track of the days during her time on the streets. "Mm-hmm," Richard confirmed, sliding a piece of golden brown toast onto a plate. "Which means no work, no appointments, just a lazy morning." The normalcy they offered was both comforting and confusing. Lily sat at the place set for her, watching as Richard served the breakfast and Diane poured orange juice into a glass. That looked too fancy for everyday use. "Before we eat," Diane said, her tone shifting slightly, "there's something we should tell you, Lily." Lily's body tensed, her eyes immediately darting to the exit. "Here it comes," she thought. "We've been in touch with a social worker named Amanda Collins," Diane continued carefully. "She's assigned to your case, and she's very concerned about you." "You said you wouldn't call them," Lily accused, her voice tight with betrayal, her hands already gripping the edge of the table, ready to push back and run. "We didn't report that we found you," Richard clarified quickly. "Not exactly. Diane knows Amanda professionally. We reached out to her yesterday to learn more about your situation, to understand how we might help. She's coming here this morning," Diane added, "just to talk. No one is going to force you to go anywhere you don't want to go. Not today." Lily's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Why should I believe you?" It was Richard who answered, his voice steady. "Because we know what it's like to lose everything." Something in his tone made Lily pause. There was a depth of understanding there that couldn't be faked. Still, she remained wary. "What do you mean?" Richard exchanged a glance with Diane, who nodded encouragingly. He took a deep breath before continuing. 5 years ago, I had a different life. I was married to my first wife, Jennifer, and we had a daughter named Emily. She was 7, a little younger than you. His voice wavered slightly but remained controlled. They were driving home one night when another car lost control on a road. Neither of them survived. The kitchen fell silent except for the ticking of the clock above the sink. Lily stared at Richard, seeing him differently now, recognizing in his eyes a pain that mirrored something in her own. "I'm sorry," she said simply, the words inadequate but sincere. Richard nodded, accepting her condolence. "After it happened, I couldn't bear to be around children, especially girls Emily's age. It hurt too much. I threw myself into work, shut everything else out. Then, 3 years ago, I met Diane." Diane reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "We helped each other heal," she explained. "My work with traumatized children had taken its toll on me. I was burning out, losing faith in the system I worked within. Richard reminded me why the work mattered, even when it was difficult." "When we saw you selling your drawings," Richard continued, "something changed. Your picture, the one of a family, it was the first time in years I'd allowed myself to really look at a child's drawing. It broke something open inside me." Lily absorbed this information, her emotional defenses wavering in the face of their honesty. "Is that why you bought it? Because it reminded you of your daughter?" "Partly," Richard admitted, "but also because I saw something in you, Lily. A strength, a resilience that reminded me of what matters." The doorbell rang, startling all of them. Diane glanced at her watch. "That must be Amanda. Remember, Lily, just a conversation. You're not being taken anywhere today." As Diane went to answer the door, Lily looked at Richard, a new understanding passing between them. "Your French toast is getting cold," she said finally, a small olive branch extended. Richard smiled, some of the tension easing from his shoulders. "Can't have that, can we?" Amanda Collins was not what Lily had expected. Instead of the stern, overworked social worker she'd encountered before, Amanda was young, with bright eyes and a gentle demeanor that immediately set Lily more at ease. She declined breakfast, but accepted coffee, sitting at the table with them, without creating the feeling of an interrogation. "It's good to see you safe, Lily," she said sincerely. "We've been worried." Lily pushed her remaining French toast around her plate, not worried enough to fix what was happening at Riverside. Amanda didn't deny this accusation. "You're right. The system failed you, and I'm truly sorry for that. That's part of what I want to talk about today." For the next hour, the four of them engaged in a conversation that was sometimes tense, sometimes emotional, but always honest. Amanda explained the realities of the foster care system, its limitations, its flaws, but also the people within it who genuinely wanted to help. She acknowledged that Riverside Children's Home had serious problems that were being investigated, but also emphasized that Lily couldn't legally remain outside the system. "So what happens now?" Lily asked finally, her voice small but determined. "I'm not going back there." "No," Amanda agreed firmly. "You won't be returning to Riverside. That much I can promise." "Then where?" Amanda hesitated, glancing at Richard and Diane. "There are several possibilities we need to discuss." It was Diane who spoke next, her professional calm momentarily giving way to something more vulnerable. "Lily, Richard and I have been talking. This is very preliminary, and there would be many steps involved, many conversations to have, but we'd like to explore the possibility of having you stay with us, potentially as a foster placement and perhaps, eventually, something more permanent." The words hung in the air, momentous and fragile. Lily looked between the three adults, searching for deception, for ulterior motives, finding none. "You mean, like adoption?" she asked, the word itself carrying both terror and longing. "That would be the eventual goal," Richard confirmed, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "But that's a big decision for all of us. We don't have to decide everything today." Amanda nodded in agreement. There would be a process. Richard and Diane would need to be certified. As foster parents, there would be home studies, background checks, interviews, and most importantly, Lily, you would have a say every step of the way. "What about right now?" Lily asked, the practical concerns of her immediate future pressing in. "Today? Tomorrow?" "That's what we need to figure out," Amanda replied honestly. "The ideal situation would be a temporary emergency placement with a certified foster family, while Richard and Diane complete the certification process. But given your specific circumstances and your history of running away—" "I wouldn't run. If I could stay here," Lily said quickly, surprising even herself with the certainty in her voice. Not if they really want me to stay." Richard and Diane exchanged a look of such profound hope that Lily felt something crack within her own carefully constructed walls. "We do want you to stay," Diane said softly. "Very much." "Is there any way," Richard asked Amanda, "that Lily could remain with us during the certification process, some kind of emergency or temporary approval?" Amanda considered this, tapping her pen against her notepad. "It's not standard procedure, but there are provisions for kinship care that can be expedited. Usually that's for relatives, but given the circumstances, Lily's history at Riverside, her expressed preference to stay here, my professional assessment of her welfare, I might be able to make a case for an emergency approval." "What would that require?" Diane asked. "Initial background checks, a home safety assessment, character references. The full certification would still need to follow, but this could potentially allow Lily to stay here in the meantime, with regular check-ins from me." Hope bloomed cautiously on Lily's face. "Really? I wouldn't have to go somewhere else first?" "I'll have to make some calls. Submit some paperwork," Amanda cautioned. "But yes, that's what I'm going to recommend. Of course, this is assuming that everyone is certain about this direction." 3 pairs of eyes turned to Lily, giving her the power in this moment. Perhaps the first real power she'd had over her own life in years. "I want to stay," she said, her voice stronger now. "If they really want me." "We do," Richard and Diane responded in unison, the certainty in their voices leaving no room for doubt. As Amanda made her calls from the living room, Lily found herself standing before the refrigerator, looking at the drawing she'd made the previous night, the careful depiction of Richard and Diane outside their brownstone, with the small figure of herself added as an afterthought, standing apart from them. With quiet deliberation, she took the drawing down, found a pencil in the kitchen drawer, and made a small but significant change. When she replaced it on the refrigerator, the 3 figures were now holding hands, connected by carefully drawn lines that bridged the spaces between them. It was just a drawing, just lines on paper, but as Richard and Diane entered the kitchen and noticed the change, the smiles that bloomed on their faces suggested it might also be something more, a first step toward healing, toward family, toward home. Chapter 6. Building bridges. The next 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind of paperwork, interviews and adjustments as the Wells household adapted to its newest member. Amanda had worked minor miracles with the system, securing an emergency placement that allowed Lily to stay with Richard and Diane while they underwent the expedited foster certification process. Their brownstone transformed subtly with each passing day. Colourful drawings appeared on the refrigerator. A pair of small sneakers found their place by the door. A collection of library books accumulated on the coffee table. The guest room gradually evolved from its neutral elegance to reflect its new occupant. A desk for drawing, shelves for books, walls slowly filling with art. For Lily, the transition wavered between wonderful and terrifying. After years in the system and weeks on the streets, having a room of her own, regular meals, and adults who genuinely seemed to care about her well-being felt almost too good to be true. She kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Richard to lose patience, for Diane to grow tired of her presence, for the fragile new reality to shatter. On a bright Saturday morning in February, Richard found Lily sitting on the window seat, in her room, sketchbook open but untouched on her lap, staring out at the street below. "Everything okay?" he asked, hovering in the doorway, still careful to respect her space. Lily shrugged, not meeting his eyes. "Fine." Richard recognized the tone. He'd used it himself many times after losing Jennifer and Emily, when well-meaning friends would ask how he was doing. Fine was the word you used when you weren't fine at all, but couldn't articulate why. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, gesturing to the window seat. Another shrug, but she moved over slightly, making room. Richard sat, noting the view of Marlborough Street, the historic brownstones across the way, the winter sunlight catching on the brass door fixtures. "Nice perspective from here," he commented. "Good spot for drawing." Lily nodded, fingers tracing the edge of her sketchbook. "I was trying to, but... She hesitated, then, "What if I mess it up?" Richard tilted his head, sensing the question held deeper meaning. "The drawing." "Everything," Lily whispered, the word heavy with fear. "What if I do something wrong and you guys decide—" She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Richard understood with painful clarity the fear of abandonment, of conditional love, of never being quite good enough to keep. "Lily," he said gently, "there's something important you should know about mistakes. I make them all the time." She looked up, skepticism clear in her expression. "It's true," he insisted. "Ask Diane. Last week I completely forgot about an important client meeting. Month before that, I approved a design with measurements that would have made a doorway too narrow for wheelchair access. Thankfully, my team caught it before construction. And don't get me started on my cooking disasters." A tiny smile flickered across Lily's face. "The thing is," Richard continued, "mistakes are how we learn. They're not deal breakers, not in my work, and certainly not in families." Real families. "Maybe," Lily muttered. "Foster care is different. One problem and they move you." The bitter truth in her words struck Richard like a physical blow. "That's not going to happen here," he said firmly. "This isn't just a foster placement for us, Lily. We're in this for the long haul, if that's what you want too." Lily studied his face, searching for insincerity. "You say that now, but you don't really know me. What if I'm not what you expected? What if I'm not enough like Emily?" The question caught Richard off guard, though perhaps it shouldn't have. Of course she would wonder, would compare herself to the daughter he had lost. "You're right, that I don't know everything about you yet," he acknowledged. "And you don't know everything about us either. That's the journey we're on together. Getting to know each other, building trust. But Lily, I need you to hear this. We're not looking for another Emily. We're not trying to replace what we lost." He paused, searching for the right words. "When I lost my first family, I thought I would never feel love again. I walled myself off from anything that might hurt. Then Diane came into my life, and slowly I started to heal. And now you're here, not to fill the space Emily left, but to create your own place in our lives." Lily absorbed this, fingers now fidgeting with the spiral binding of her sketchbook. But what if I disappoint you? We might disappoint each. Other sometimes, Richard said honestly. That happens in all relationships. The difference is we won't give up when it gets hard. We'll talk about it, work through it. That's what commitment means. A knock at the door frame interrupted them. Diane stood there, car keys in hand. Sorry to interrupt, but we should get going soon if we want to make our appointment with Dr. Chen. Richard checked his watch. Right, thanks for the reminder. Lily's therapist appointments were a non-negotiable part of their new routine. Dr. Chen, a child psychologist specializing in trauma and attachment, had been recommended by Diane's professional network. Though initially resistant, Lily had gradually warmed to the sessions, especially once she understood that Richard and Diane were seeing their own therapist to navigate their transition to parenthood. Can we get ice cream after? Lily asked, a note of tentative normalcy in her voice that made Richard's heart swell. Even though it's February, you'll freeze, he teased, relieved by her return to the present moment. Hot fudge will keep me warm, she countered with growing confidence. Can't argue with that logic, Diane laughed from the doorway. Ice cream it is. As Lily put away her sketchbook and reached for her shoes, Richard caught Diane's questioning look. He gave her a subtle nod. They'd talk later about what he and Lily had discussed. The drive to Dr. Chen's office was filled with the casual conversation that was becoming their normal. Diane mentioning a challenging case at work, Richard updating them on the community center project in South Boston, Lily sharing something she'd read about sea turtles at the library. These ordinary exchanges, Richard reflected, were as important as the deeper conversations in building their family bonds. While Lily was in her session, Richard and Diane sat in the waiting room, speaking in low voices about the approaching milestone, their final foster certification interview scheduled for the following week. Amanda thinks it's going to go well, Diane said, flipping through a magazine without really seeing it. All our references checked out. The home study was positive, our backgrounds are clean. Barring any surprises, we should be officially certified by next Friday. And then? Richard asked, though they both knew the answer. And then we can begin. The adoption process, if that's still what we all want. The word adoption still sent a flutter of both terror and joy through Richard's chest. It is what I want, he confirmed. More than I ever thought possible. But we need to make sure it's what Lily wants too. Really wants, not just what she thinks will keep her safe. Diane nodded in agreement. Dr. Chen says she's making good progress, but there are still deep-seated fears of abandonment, understandably. We need to keep reassuring her through actions, not just words. I'm trying, Richard said, thinking of his conversation with Lily that morning. Sometimes I worry I'm not doing enough or doing the wrong things. Parenting didn't come with a manual the first time around, and this is different. You're doing wonderfully, Diane assured him, squeezing his hand. We both are. It's not about being perfect. It's about being present, being consistent. Their conversation paused as Lily emerged from Dr. Chen's office, her expression thoughtful, but not troubled. A good sign. How was it? Diane asked as they walked to the car. Good, Lily replied. Dr. Chen said I'm getting better at identifying my feelings instead of just reacting to them. That's a skill many adults never master, Richard commented, impressed by her self-awareness. True to their promise, they stopped for ice cream despite the February chill, finding a small shop near Boston Common that stayed open year-round. As they sat at a table by the window, Lily savoring her hot fudge sundae while Richard and Diane shared a banana split, a familiar figure passed on the sidewalk outside. "Miss Margaret!" Lily exclaimed, recognizing the librarian from Beacon Hill. The woman paused, peering through the window, her face lighting up with recognition. Richard gestured for her to join them, and after a moment's hesitation, she entered the shop. "Lily, Parker," Margaret said warmly. "I've been wondering about you. You haven't been to the library in weeks." "I go to the one near my new home now," Lily explained, gesturing to Richard and Diane. This is my foster family." The hesitation before the word family was brief but noticeable. Richard extended his hand. "Richard Wells, this is my wife, Diane. Thank you for looking out for Lily when she needed it." Margaret's expression shifted from polite to understanding. "So you're the ones," she said quietly. "Sarah mentioned a couple had been asking about her. I'm glad to see she's in good hands." "We think we're the lucky ones," Diane replied sincerely. Margaret turned to Lily. "And how are you doing, my young reader? Found any good books lately?" As Lily enthusiastically described her current reading list, Richard observed the interaction with a swelling sense of gratitude. This woman, who had shown small kindnesses to a homeless child when no one was watching, represented the thin thread of humanity that had kept Lily afloat until they found her. "Would you like to join us?" he offered. "We'd love to hear more about Lily's library adventures." Margaret checked her watch. "I have a few minutes before my next appointment." What followed was a revealing conversation about Lily's time at the library, how she would carefully clean up after herself so as not to give the staff reason to ask her to leave, how she would help reshelve books sometimes to earn her keep, how she had a special spot in the reference section where she could see the entrance but not be easily seen herself. "She has quite a talent for art," Margaret told them. "I noticed her copying illustrations from our art books, improving with each attempt. I always thought with the right opportunities—" "We're looking into art classes," Diane said, "once things are more settled." When Margaret left, promising to visit Lily at her new library branch sometime, the three of them continued their walk through Boston Common. The day had warmed slightly, with patches of grass visible through the melting snow. Families were out enjoying the respite from winter's harshness, children throwing bread to ducks in the pond, couples walking hand in hand, dogs chasing balls across open areas. Lily walked between Richard and Diane, not quite holding their hands, but close enough that their arms occasionally brushed against each other, a comfortable proximity that hadn't existed weeks before. "What would you think," Richard said casually, "about inviting some of my colleagues and their families over for dinner next weekend, after the certification is finalized?" Lily looked up, surprise evident in her expression. "Do you want to introduce me to people you work with?" "Of course," Richard replied. "Kate's been asking to meet you, and my partner Tom has 2 kids about your age, Zach and Mia. They're good kids. I think you'd like them." The implication wasn't lost on Lily. This wasn't a temporary arrangement to be kept separate from their real lives. They were integrating her into every aspect of their world. "Okay," she agreed cautiously, "but what will you tell them about me?" "What would you like us to tell them?" Diane asked, turning the question back to her. Lily considered this seriously. "The truth, I guess, that I'm staying with you, that we're figuring things out together." "That sounds perfect," Richard said, feeling as though another small bridge had been crossed in their journey toward becoming a family. As they neared the exit of the park, Lily stopped suddenly, her attention caught by a street artist creating elaborate chalk drawings on the pavement. His work was beautiful, landscapes that seemed to recede into the ground, creating an illusion of depth that made passers-by stop and stare. "That's amazing," Lily breathed, watching the artist work. Richard recognized the hunger in her expression, not just appreciation but aspiration. "You could do that someday," he told her, "if you wanted to." "You think so?" she asked, doubt and hope mingling in her voice. "I know so," he replied with certainty. "You have a natural talent. With practice, with the right teaching, we believe in you, Lily," Diane added softly, "whatever path you choose." As they stood there, a family among families enjoying the brief winter sunshine, Richard felt something he had thought lost forever, a sense of wholeness, of possibility, of future. They weren't there yet. There were still hurdles to overcome, wounds to heal, trust to build. But watching Lily's face as she studied the chalk artist's technique, seeing the spark of determination in her eyes, he knew, with bone-deep certainty, that they were on the right path. The girl with the drawings had found her way home. Chapter 7. The Final Drawing. 6 months later, Boston basked in the golden light of late summer. The public garden burst with vibrant flowers, families lounged, on blankets beneath shade trees, and the swan boats glided peacefully across the lagoon. On a wrought iron bench near the famous duckling statues, Richard Wells sat beside his daughter, watching as her pencil moved confidently across the page of her sketchbook. "Hold still," Lily instructed, glancing up at him occasionally to capture some detail of his face. "You keep smiling and changing your expression." "Sorry," Richard apologized, trying to maintain a neutral look. "It's just that I'm proud of you." Lily rolled her eyes, but the gesture was affectionate rather than dismissive. "You say that at least 10 times a day." "Because it's true at least 10 times a day," he countered. In the month since Lily had come into their lives, the transformation had been remarkable, not just in her, but in all of them. The foster certification had been approved as expected, and the adoption process was now in its final stages. The court date was set for the following month, after which Lily Parker would legally become Lily Parker Wells, a hyphenated name that had been her idea, honoring her past while embracing her future. The journey hadn't been without challenges. Lily still had nightmares occasionally, moments of doubt where the old fears of abandonment would resurface. There had been a particularly difficult week when she'd found an old photo album containing pictures of Emily, triggering both guilt and insecurity about her place in the family. But they had worked through it together, with honesty and patience, with therapy and late-night hot chocolates, with the steady accumulation of trust that comes from promises kept and love demonstrated day after day. "There," Lily said, turning her sketchbook to show Richard the completed portrait. "What do you think?" Richard studied the drawing with genuine admiration. Lily's artistic skills had flourished under the guidance of her art teacher, Mrs. Abernathy, who had recognized her raw talent immediately. The portrait captured not just his physical features, but somehow the essence of him, the thoughtful eyes, the slight smile that appeared more often these days, the lines that spoke of both past sorrows and present joys. "It's incredible," he said sincerely. "You've really captured my distinguished grey hairs." Lily laughed. "Diane says they make you look distinguished. I just think they make you look old." "Hey now," Richard protested with mock offense. They fell into comfortable silence, watching a family of ducks paddle across the pond. Lily's art supplies were spread between them on the bench, quality pencils and a professional sketchbook that had been gifts for her 10th birthday 2 weeks earlier. The celebration had been small, but meaningful. Dinner at her favorite restaurant, a chocolate cake baked by Diane, presents that reflected how well they had come to know her in the relatively short time they'd been a family. "Is Diane meeting us here?" Lily asked, beginning to pack up her supplies. Richard checked his watch. Any minute now, her last session ended at 3. As if on cue, they spotted Diane entering the garden from the Arlington Street side, her curly hair catching the sunlight. She waved when she saw them, quickening her pace. "Sorry I'm late," she said, slightly breathless as she joined them. "My client had a breakthrough, and I couldn't cut the session short." "A good breakthrough?" Richard asked, making room for her on the bench. "Very good," Diane confirmed, her professional satisfaction evident. She turned to Lily. "And how was your afternoon with this old guy? Did he bore you with architectural history again?" "Actually, he was a pretty good model," Lily said, showing Diane the portrait. "Wow," Diane breathed, genuinely impressed. "Lily, this is fantastic. You've really captured his expression. That look he gets when he's proud but trying to play it cool." "I don't have a look," Richard protested. "You absolutely do," both females responded in unison, then dissolved into laughter. These moments of easy connection, of inside jokes and shared understanding, had become more frequent as the months passed. What had begun as caution and tentative hope had gradually evolved into something solid and real, a family, built not on blood but on choice, on mutual respect and growing love. "Ready for ice cream?" Richard suggested, standing and offering his hands to both of them. I believe that was the promised reward for sitting still for a portrait. "You barely sat still," Lily pointed out, but she took his offered hand anyway, a gesture that had once been unthinkable but now came naturally. They walked through the garden toward their favorite ice cream shop, Lily between them occasionally, skipping a step to keep pace with their longer strides. As they crossed Charles Street, Diane brought up the subject they'd been discussing for weeks. So, I've been thinking more about your idea of converting the third floor into a studio space, she said to Lily. If we're going to do it, we should probably start planning the renovation soon before the weather turns cold. Lily's expression brightened. Really? You're serious? Absolutely, Richard confirmed. That space is just being used for storage. Anyway, it has the best natural light in the house with those north-facing windows. It would make a perfect studio. And we thought maybe you could help with the design, Diane added, since you're the one who'll be using it. Lily's pace slowed as the significance of this offer sank in. A permanent space, designed for her, in a home that was becoming truly hers. That would be amazing, she managed, emotion making her voice slightly hoarse. Richard squeezed her hand gently, understanding the impact of their suggestion. It wasn't just about a room. It was about belonging, about permanence, about a future they were building together. At the ice cream shop, they claimed their usual table by the window. The owner, Mr. Rossi, greeted them by name. They had become regulars over the past months, regardless of season. The usual for the Wells family? Wells, he asked with a warm smile. Yes, please, Richard confirmed, no longer correcting the assumption that they were already legally what they felt in their hearts, a family. As they waited for their ice cream, Lily pulled out her sketchbook again, flipping back through pages that chronicled the past 6 months. Scenes from their brownstone, studies of Boston landmarks, portraits of Richard and Diane, sketches of her new friends from school, even a few self-portraits that showed her growing confidence. I was thinking, she said, a slight nervousness in her voice, after the adoption is final next month. Would it be okay if I tried to find my birth parents? Not to meet them or anything, she added quickly, seeing the flicker of concern cross their faces, just to know more about where I came from. Richard and Diane exchanged a glance, having anticipated this question might arise eventually. They had learned from Lily's file that she had entered the foster system at age 5 after her mother, struggling with addiction, had been deemed unable to care for her. Her father had never been in the picture. The details beyond that were sparse. Of course, Diane said gently. That's a completely natural desire, Lily. We can help you with that search whenever you're ready. You wouldn't be hurt? Lily asked, her eyes moving between them. Not at all, Richard assured her. Your past is part of you, Lily. We'd never want to erase that or pretend it didn't exist. Wanting to know about your biological parents doesn't diminish what we're building together. Relief washed over Lily's face. I've been worried about bringing it up. You can bring up anything with us, Diane reminded her. Always. Mr. Rossi arrived with their ice cream, a hot fudge sundae for Lily, coffee ice cream for Richard, and strawberry for Diane, momentarily pausing the conversation. I have something to show you both, Lily said after they'd enjoyed a few bites. She carefully turned to the last page of her sketchbook, where a drawing they hadn't seen before was tucked inside a protective sleeve. It was more detailed and polished than her usual work, clearly something she had spent considerable time on. The scene depicted their brownstone, rendered with architectural accuracy that would have impressed Richard's colleagues. On the front steps stood 3 figures, Richard, Diane, and Lily, the family resemblance not in their physical features, but in their stance, in the way they leaned slightly toward each other, connected and supporting. Above them, written in elegant script that must have taken her multiple attempts to perfect, were the words, "The Parker Wells Family." I thought maybe, Lily said hesitantly, we could frame it and hang it in the living room after next month when it's official. Diane reached across the table to squeeze Lily's hand, too moved to speak immediately. Richard cleared his throat, fighting back the emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. I think that would be perfect, he managed finally. It's beautiful, Lily. Truly beautiful. There's something else, Lily added, carefully sliding the drawing from its protective sleeve to reveal what was written on the back, a single sentence in her neat handwriting. Thank you for seeing me when no one else did. The simple words carried the weight of their entire journey, from that snowy evening on Beacon Hill, when a man had paused to look at a homeless girl's drawing, to this sunny afternoon, when that same girl had found her place in the world, her voice, her family. Richard thought of the original drawing that had started it all, the one he had purchased for $20 on a cold winter night. It was framed now, hanging in his home office where he could see it every day, a reminder of how a single moment of connection could change everything. "We're the ones who should be thanking you, Lily," Diane said, her voice gentle with emotion. "For giving us a chance, for trusting us, for making us a family again." "I think," Richard added, reaching out to include both Lily and Diane in his embrace, "that we all saved each other." As they sat there in the warm afternoon light, their ice cream melting forgotten before them, Richard Wells felt a sense of completion he had thought forever lost to him. The journey wasn't over. There would be challenges ahead, teenage years to navigate, wounds that might still need healing, but the foundation was solid now, built on truth and trust and the careful, deliberate choice to love. Outside the window, Boston continued its eternal rhythm, people hurrying past, lives intersecting briefly before continuing on separate paths. But inside, in this moment of connection, 3 lives that had once been fractured by loss had found their way to each other, creating something new and strong and beautiful, like a drawing made not of broken lines, but of a single, continuous stroke that loops back on itself, forming a perfect, unbroken circle, and in that circle a family. 3 weeks later, on a bright September morning, they stood before a judge in family court, formally completing the adoption process that would legally recognize what their hearts already knew. As the judge pronounced the final words, making Lily officially Lily Parker Wells, Richard thought of how life sometimes offers second chances disguised as endings. How what appears to be a closed door can actually be an opening to something previously unimagined. Lily stood between them, her hand in his, her other hand in Diane's, the 3 of them connected just as in her drawing. And as they walked out of the courthouse into the autumn sunshine, they carried with them not just legal documents confirming their new status, but the deeper truth they had discovered together. That family isn't always what you're born into. Sometimes it's what you find, what you build, what you choose. Sometimes it's the simple lines that connect 3 figures on a page, drawn by a child who dared to hope for what seemed impossible. Sometimes it's a drawing that becomes reality. The end. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Lily, Richard, and Diane has touched your heart. For more emotional journeys like this one, we've created a special playlist with equally captivating stories. Find it by clicking on the link to your left. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day, we bring unique stories that explore life's complexities and the healing power of connection. We look forward to reading your thoughts in the comments section below. What part of the Parker Wells family's journey resonated with you most?